All right, so today we're going to dig into a document that's almost 100 years old, but you know what? Its ideas might be more relevant right now than ever. We're talking about the Cooperative Societies Rules from 1927, and they're basically a super detailed blueprint for how to build a fair, member-owned organization completely from scratch.
So let's just start with a huge question. Let's say you want to build a business, but it's not about making profits for outside investors. Instead, it's actually owned by its members, and it's run for their benefit. How would you even do that? What kind of ground rules would you need to make sure it stays true to that mission? Well, the wild thing is, lawmakers back in 1927 were wrestling with those exact same questions. And their answer wasn't just some boring piece of legislation. It was a really detailed instruction manual, a practical step-by-step guide. So let's crack it open and see what this old blueprint has to say.
Okay, part one, bringing a society to life. Every organization has to start somewhere, right? We'll begin by looking at how a co-op is actually born, the formal, structured process that gets it off the ground and kind of locks in its core principles from day one. So right off the bat, the rules lay out this really clear three-step process. You start with a formal application, a specific form called Schedule A, and you have to include 3 copies of your proposed bylaws. We'll get to why those are so important in just a sec. Then, a government official, the registrar, goes over everything before giving the final thumbs up. It's a very deliberate process, and it's designed to make sure every new group starts on really solid legal ground.
And those bylaws, they're everything. Rule 4 basically makes them the mandatory DNA of the co-op. They have to spell out all the fundamental stuff, the society's name, its purpose, the rules for joining. But what's really key is that they also force you to decide right from the beginning how the co-op will handle its money, how to raise capital, how it'll give out loans, and, this is the big one, how the profits get distributed. All the key decisions are mapped out by the members, for the members, before they even get started.
All right, let's move on to part 2, the rules of money. This is the financial lifeblood of the co-op. And the rules get really specific about how these societies were supposed to handle capital, borrowing, and especially profit. Okay, so one of the first big financial decisions was about liability. If a society went with unlimited liability, which meant the members themselves were kind of personally on the hook for any debts, Rule 7 made them set a really strict, government-approved cap on how much money they could borrow from outsiders. For groups with limited liability, Rule 8 gave them a clear formula. You couldn't borrow more than 15 times what you had in capital and reserves. See? Both paths were designed to force them to be financially careful and not take any wild risks. Now, check out this number, 6.25%. It seems so random, so specific, right? Well, according to Rule 24, this was the absolute most you could pay out in dividends to shareholders in any given year. This one little detail tells you everything about the philosophy here. Co-ops were not designed to be speculative investments. The goal was never about making huge returns for people who just owned a share. It was about creating stable, sustainable benefits for the people who were actually using the co-op.
So if the profits weren't all going to shareholders, where did they go? Well, Rule 25 lays it all out. First, a piece had to go into a reserve fund for stability. Think of it like a mandatory rainy day fund. Then you could pay that dividend, but only up to that 6.25% cap. And now here's the brilliant part, the member bonus. This wasn't based on how many shares you owned. It was based on how much you actually participated, like how many goods you bought from the co-op. It was a system built to directly reward engagement, which reinforces the whole point of the society. Of course, anytime you get a group of people together in an organization, you're gonna have disagreements. It's just human nature. And what's so fascinating is that the 1927 rules totally saw this coming, and they built in a whole system for keeping the peace and settling disputes in a fair way. So instead of everyone running straight to court, which gets expensive and messy fast, Rule 32 created this internal arbitration system. When a fight broke out, the registrar would step in. Each side got to nominate their own arbitrator, and they'd form a 3-person panel to hear the case. And get this. Their standard for making a decision wasn't just about cold, hard law. It was about justice, equity, and good conscience. The whole goal was to find a resolution that felt fair within the co-op family. And then you get to this rule, Rule 36, and it's, wow. It explicitly says, no party shall be represented by a legal practitioner. No lawyers. Just think about that for a second. The whole system was designed to keep disputes from getting bogged down in legal jargon and crazy high costs. It kept things simple, it kept things accessible, and it forced people to argue based on the facts and on fairness, not on who could afford the better lawyer.
And the rules had other really smart safeguards too, just to head off problems before they could even start. Rule 52, for example, took on conflicts of interest head on by banning loans to committee members unless they got special permission. And Rule 46 kept the co-op focused on its business, wisely saying it couldn't get tangled up in controversial religious debates that could split the membership apart.
Okay, on to our last big section, Part 4. What happens when a co-op ends? The blueprint covers the entire life cycle, including what to do when things don't work out. Even when a co-op failed, the rules made sure there was an orderly and transparent way to wind things down. Rule 38 makes sure that a liquidation isn't just some chaotic collapse. An independent liquidator is brought in to manage the whole process. They put out a public notice for anyone who's owed money, they figure out what each member needs to contribute to cover any debts, and they have to give regular progress reports. The whole thing wraps up with a final meeting where the liquidator has to stand up and explain to the members exactly what went wrong. It's all about transparency and accountability, right to the very end. So, after walking through this document that's nearly 100 years old, what's the big takeaway? Why does any of this still matter today?
Well, the specific percentages and procedures might feel a little dated, but the principles at the heart of these rules are absolutely timeless. You've got democratic control by the members. You have financial prudence baked right into the system with reserve funds and limits on borrowing. You've got a structure where the main goal is member benefit, not runaway profits. A built-in, simple, fair way to handle disagreements, and a clear playbook for every stage of an organization's life. I mean, these are the building blocks for any fair and sustainable group. And that really leaves us with one final thought, doesn't it? In a time when we're all looking for new and better ways to build businesses and communities, maybe some of the best ideas aren't new at all. What can this incredibly detailed blueprint from 1927 teach us about building the kind of fairer, more resilient, more human-centered organizations that so many of us want to see today? It's something to think about.